Good morning, all. As Rakesh has said, we are somewhat time challenged, so I'm going to crack on, and we're going to take a look at retail in India. And we have a topic that is, I think, rather beguilingly titled "From Bricks to Clicks." I myself am a broad spectrum technologist with a very large layer of business, including quite a lot of scar tissue from my own enterprises. And I'm somewhat curious in the Indian context as to whether the story is as simple as this, or whether, given the dynamics of India, it may turn out to be a slightly different trajectory. We have four panelists, and we're going to cover a few topics, including branding, the influence of the technology environment in India, what has already happened in terms of international retailers in India and their relative success and failures, and some of the challenges in terms of supply chain and logistics. So I think of those, let's start off with the question about how social media will impact brand building in retailing. And I don't know if any of you would particularly like to start off. Rachel, is that one that you could address for us?
Yeah, absolutely. Hello, everyone. What a fascinating conversation this morning. I think social media and the rise of smartphones is going to have a massive impact. You think about the size of the population in India, 1.2, 1.3 billion people. We've heard already that there's a relatively low saturation, particularly compared to China or the Western world, in terms of smartphone penetration. And we know that connected devices are rising 5 times faster than in the global average, 2013, 2014, and expected to be the same this year as well. Now, that introduction of mobile technology is creating what we've already known in the Western world as the non-stop consumer. This consumer who is always on. The ability for organisations to connect with that consumer at any point, at any moment, about any product or any service. And it causes massive disruption in terms of the retail and e-commerce environments, because you're able to snatch a customer from a traditional provider. There have been a number of particularly international brands that have been very successful in India, partly because of the British heritage, partly because of the prestige associated with some of the large international players. And I think there'll be a great inflection point where a number of local-based startups can cause huge disruption, being able to tap into that consumer experience through mobile technology and also then through social media. We know that people post more negative comments on social media than positive ones when it comes to brand experience. And so that will cause some disruption as well for global brands who have enjoyed this monopoly. There'll be a great opportunity for small, innovative solutions to just get a niche in the market, engage a consumer, and start to create this swell of feeling against some of those global brands. So I think that this social and smartphone phenomenon that we're going to see multiply exponentially in the next couple of years will actually give a number of global brands a run for their money. And it will allow some of the local-based startups to cause, as I say, huge disruption and grab that customer base.
And anybody who have a view from the perspective of a brand owner looking into India? Any would you like to pick the?
Yeah, I mean, we recently launched Wendy's Hamburger's first restaurant in Delhi, and the publicity for that consisted of one poster in Racecourse Road, and all the rest of it was done on social media. And I suspect on the second and third launches we won't bother with the posters. The one thing I would say, sitting as I am next to somebody who knows rather more about this than me, is I think that all brands, particularly international ones, need to understand that the average Indian user of social media is massively more competent at it than the average UK user. And social media is a two-way game. And we make absolutely certain that at all times we are on the various forms of social media, answering people, thanking people, apologising to people, whatever we feel we need to do for whatever points are raised. And I think we should be in no doubt, and Venu, I think you will agree with this, that the Indian consumer who for many, many years has suffered from appalling quality for most of the stuff he buys, has now realized that it is possible to influence quality by raising issues, and they are far more savvy about all this stuff than we are here. And international, as you say, international brands that go in there need to be absolutely clear about this and be prepared to deal with it. Let's hand over to somebody who actually knows about this.
I think the fact that social media will be very, very important, I think, is almost a given. I think there's no dispute about it. The one element which I would like to also include into this factor in is the demographic of the country. I think about 65% of that population today is under the age of 35. In 10 years' time, it'll still be a growing under 35 population, and there are not many countries in the world which will be able to say that. When you marry that with, and obviously the assumption here is the younger generation is much more savvy when it comes to use of technology, use of mobile. It's a killer combination, because you've got a young population, handphones and smartphones which are ridiculously cheap now. I think they start at about 20 quid, and the bulk of the market is between 20 to 50 quid. So you've got availability of devices which makes access possible. And add to that a 4G, which is now Reliance have announced that they will be launching 4G in December. And they want to launch it at a scale which will make it accessible to all. So they're talking of having tablets at a very, very low price, and I think it is again about between 20 to 30 quid or thereabouts. So, and that explosion which will happen will be humongous. Even today, there are 140 million smartphone users in the country, and I think it not just 2 years back, it was 59. So it's more than doubled in 2 years, and that's only going to explode. So on the one side, you've got the availability of technology. On the other side, you've got a young population, which is obviously way more and more into education. Going to colleges in cities is almost a given. Every child wants to go graduate, at least do a graduation, if not beyond. So all of that put together makes access quite easy. And then all the factors that David mentioned and Rebecca mentioned in terms of the usage of it just explodes. And if I just give one example, and I'll close with that. When we used to go on our end of season sale and our mid-season sales, we used to always carry print ads. Last year, we just stopped that. We said we won't do any print ads. We will do only SMSs and emails and Facebook. We've continued with that, and yesterday we actually launched our end of season sale. Thursday, only Facebook, and it was a preview only for loyalty card customers, so SMS and email and Facebook, and that's all that we used, and sales were absolutely fantastic. So I think it's just going to go explode in the next few years.
And also, ignoring social media is no more an option. So there has been a very recent phenomenon where a large multinational brand chose not to respond to a lot of feedback that was coming about the specific quality of its products. The effect has been very dangerous in terms of the eroding the business value. So one of the things which we have observed as we work with the various Indian companies and also our partners, that communicating on social media, India being more of an emotional country and people want to relate to the brands that they buy on a regular basis, if you stop lines of communication, and especially on social media where the youth is, the negative perceptions increases. So it's more important to communicate regularly with your customers and with your buyers, and especially through the social media channel.
And so there's a theme in there about connectedness with youth and the fact that for internet in India, read mobile, 10, 12 times more mobile connections than fixed connections. So there's an underlying theme in that, there's technological infrastructural. So smartphones and their transformation in retail, I think some of that we've dealt with. Is there anything else that's about the smartphone nature of that rather than the social media, or are those one and the same in this context?
I suppose the biggest example is that we have a fashion online retailer who very publicly have shut down their desktop. They are only on mobile now. They did that about a couple of months back. There's Myntra, and that just points to the direction that smartphones will take. So this company, and it's a fairly large company, Myntra is one of the leading fashion online retailers in the country, and they took the call that they will not offer a desktop, their portals. So it's only app, and they're a part of Flipkart, taken a big bold step, and the logic was that the number of orders they were getting on mobile was over 80%. So they say the cost of maintaining two platforms versus one platform, and I'm sure Rebecca knows a lot more about that, but in terms of just keeping pace with the change of technology, being able to stay ahead of the game, but focusing on just that one device rather than trying to do it on two, makes immense sense for them. Whether successful or not, I don't know, but it's an indication.
Good.
Good.
Sorry.
I think what people need to remember when they go into India is that all these sectors which have taken us, you can do mobile telephones, you can do retail, you can do supermarkets, they all have achieved in 5 or 10 years what we took 50 or 60 years to achieve. And that is going to continue. It's no good looking at the development of the businesses as we see them in this country and see that the same speed of development is going to take place in India. It isn't. It is going to be a lot quicker than that, because they're sort of not starting with anything where they can jump over a whole heap of stuff we've had to struggle through.
Yeah. Yep.
And not only the smartphones, all the basic phones are also a key area of India. And large part of still Indian consumers are using the basic phones. And what we have seen is that in terms of reach, basic phones has much higher reach than even your TV or the normal printed. So one of the things which when we worked is we found out that there are some areas in India like Bihar or UP where because of electricity the normal media can't reach. So these are primarily media dark, and we started channels where there through radio, basically jingles where people can give a missed call to a number and songs would be played to him, etc. So you create a completely new channel and help connect with this wider audience which never could have been reached by any normal media.
So it's not just about smartphones, it's about mobile reach and the fact that there are probably still 10 times more feature phones than there are smartphones in the market, unless you only want to address the smartphone segment, which probably picks out a particular segment in terms of wealth. So an interesting point.
But social media is still slightly different from the smartphone and the mobile piece, because the added benefit of social media is that it does allow a relationship to be developed in a slightly different way to a pure e-commerce transactional relationship. And I think what we're seeing is, some of the points made about people's feeling around a brand, that can now be very publicly aired. And I think people are going to enjoy being that transparent around their brand experience and sharing that and feeling that actually what they received wasn't good enough. And they are able to comment on that, and they are able to influence the way that a brand is then going to engage its consumers. So that social media element that we are going to see hand in hand with smartphone and connected devices, but still slightly different, because as you say, there is still a massive population that isn't on the smartphone yet. That's going to be one of the key tools that some of the large brands and some of the new disruptors will need to get right in order to almost take it to the next level in terms of their penetration and that relationship and loyalty piece. That as more brands enter the market is going to become a scarce commodity, because you can hook the customer once, but unless you're able to build that relationship and keep them, you're just going to end up in this switching situation.
Yeah. So you get two effects. One is a different pace, and the other is a different direction of travel as well, although arguably in advance of what we're seeing here. Yeah. Please, yeah.
I'm interested in doing strategy, but on evidence-based and with smart analysis behind it. What's interesting to me is that whether this information is being harvested from these different channels particularly, because I think what's interesting in the markets, maybe in the UK and in the markets like that, is that you're making marginal sort of steps into new markets, and you're able to therefore extrapolate from what you've harvested outwards. And what I'd like to know is, if it is being harvested first of all, and if it's being harvested, how can you extrapolate when the market's advancing so quickly? How can you be sure that those new sectors of the market, you can rely on the information from the early adopters as they're almost forced to be in this case? And I think that's why it's interesting to talk about the differential between, you know, the sort of older technology, the SMS and the callbacks and the smartphone, and how that can be managed, that harvesting and extrapolation of what we know to this vastly exploding market.
Well, it rather depends where you start. I mean, as far as starting a business like in the fast food business, it is almost impossible to get any statistics you can rely on to allow yourself to make any decisions about where you put your pricing or whatever. So if Wendy's decide they want to be above McDonald's and Burger King, how far above? There are no figures, no statistics, no analytical survey to tell you that if you go there, it will have this effect on your customers. But I think in India, the whole business of analytics and analysing this stuff is there and alive and being carried on, certainly within firms like M&S and within firms who specialise in that. And it will, just as it is here, it will become an increasingly important part of business. For if you as a restaurant running a restaurant can have an analytic that tells you how many people actually are going to blow you out when they booked a table, there's your profit margin sorted. It's the same across a whole range of consumer spending. If there's some stuff now that can tell you at universities who is going to drop out and why and when. This clearly, when you're getting your £9,000 a term, makes a huge difference if you can get that accurately. So I feel sure it is being, and it will be, and you're right, it is absolutely critical to the future of any consumer business.
And there are, of course, archetypes that we can use, and they are used when entering into new markets, using new products, new propositions. You will go off as much data as you possibly can, and there are some boundaries around what can broadly work and what can't. But I think what's really interesting with the digital space is that, as you say, it's moved so quickly that there aren't a lot of sure bets that you can place. And we've seen some great disruptors, and I like the example of Dollar Shave Club for anyone who wants to go on YouTube. A company that started in the US, spent $5,000 on a YouTube video, selling razors for $1 a month, the most basic razors you can sell, and they've actually started to give Gillette a run for their money, because what they've been able to do is access a real niche in the market, which is people don't want fancy razors. They don't want it sponsored by Roger Federer. They just want something really cheap. They get it through their door every month, and it costs $1. And it's incredible how they've sprung from nowhere. And we've all got stories of organisations that have sprung from nowhere. And what is being used a lot for either disruptors or for major corporations is just a test and learn approach. You know, prove the concept, do it quickly, get some data, and then place a bet, but know that you can come back very quickly. We look at Barclays Pingit. Didn't know if it would work. It was a light touch infrastructure in terms of how they connected to their back office, but they launched it very, very quickly. They tried it, and then they went mass market. So that kind of product launch approach is going to have to be used more and more when we don't have those years and years of data to place those sure bets on.
And one of the key learnings that we have had is that the major challenge in India is with the quality of data. You don't have the same quality of data that you get in a Western European or country, because the way the government collects it, the various agencies collect it, is very poor. And the second is that you can't have one single strategy for entire India. India is more like being more of a European Union, with you have to have specific strategies for each state and each area. So one of the great examples that we have seen while working with one of the large e-commerce players is that the majority of the orders which we generally would assume that come from the big cities, which is the tier A cities in India, which Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore, etc., is not really the case. It comes from small towns and small cities all across, spread across India. Now, when we analyzed, the reason we found that there is a large population in those cities who never had access to great brands, never had access to these great products earlier because the traditional retail didn't reach them the way that it should have been. Now, as the e-commerce channel has come up, these people have a click to go and order and have access to this wider set of brands and availability, and they can order it. So people in remote northeast areas, very remote areas are ordering, and there is majority of the orders are coming from those regions, which is actually a very big surprise because the internet infrastructure is also not that great there.
And internal infrastructure in terms of?
In speed, quality, electricity is not really even at a level of, say, a tier A city in India.
And the logistics of that?
Logistics is primarily handled by the third party outsourced or the Indian Post or the various. So primarily it is outsourced. So most of the e-commerce companies have tied up with the various, I would say, third party logistics supplier who already have a network. And that's how they basically transfer it. So most of the top players have not really kind of spread their own logistic chain in all those parts of India. But now that the thought is coming that we are actually getting quite a large number of orders from that part of the country where we really never thought there would be a good e-commerce market actually.
And so there's a significant element of market creation in this and product and service creation to fit market rather than just dropping an export model existing product into the marketplace. It's just, I always think twice every time I hear the word export because I think it's about business creation and business development, not about export. And the model of putting more widgets in boxes and shipping them really just doesn't apply. Does that ring bells?
Yes.
Yeah.
And one of the key things has been that in those markets, specifically which have traditionally not been addressed, specifically in areas like northern part of India and eastern part of India, we have seen a huge surge, specifically of players which have been are disruptive. Basically, they're coming up with their own products, portfolio, and people coming up and ordering them from different parts.
And you say the logistics is being fulfilled by third parties, existing third parties, new third parties?
Existing third parties primarily. So India Post, the DTDC, all the players who are currently doing the normal courier and delivery service.
And I guess I asked the question because I think maybe a perception that logistics and so forth would pose a challenge and a barrier to movement, but you're saying that problem is getting solved. Does anybody else have a view around logistics and how it plays in these retail business developments?
I think the bloke from Marks and Spencer probably does it.
I think, and I'll probably expand that conversation to beyond just the clicks part of it, which is I think what we're focused on here. But I think logistics in a country as large as India, it's obviously quite a key factor in terms of your success or the lack of it. We've expanded in India quite rapidly and quite nicely. We've got 48 stores as of today, from Amritsar in the north to Kochi in the south, from Calcutta in the east to Ahmedabad in the west. That's a fairly wide geography that we cover. And the infrastructure, or still the nascent stage that the infrastructure is in, does become a challenge. You can't use, for example, transporting by rail is almost not thinkable really, because there's no proper tracking system. You could send it by rail but never know when it'll arrive, and there's no way you can track where it is if it doesn't arrive. So things like that pose a huge risk. In that scenario, you do have to take different calls, and do you almost sacrifice your individual cost per single or whatever metric that you're using, pay higher to still get a faster delivery and balance that out. To put that in perspective, from Delhi to Kochi, our warehouse is in Delhi, and to get that to Kochi could take as much as 10 days. Now, in that scenario, are we better using air rather than road transport? What's the economics of it in terms of lost sales versus a higher logistics cost? So a number of those decisions need to be taken. Again, then go on to, do you go to one warehouse servicing the whole country, or do you do two? A lot of retailers do four. having one in each part of the country. Depends on your volume and your throughput, obviously. So I think there are quite a few factors that come into play. And if you look at e-com, and one of the reasons e-com has been as successful with a few companies is because of the fact that they have given a huge amount of attention and focus on the logistics part of it. And in a country as complex as India, some of those leading online retailers are actually willing to stick their neck out and offer as much as same-day delivery. Now, you can imagine the kind of logistics that they would need to put in place to be able to do that. And companies, and if I just give an example of companies using that as a competitive advantage, the whole logistics part of it, where there are, and especially this is in the white goods sector, where there are at least 2 retailers who are offering. Now, in India, it's fairly common for when you buy a TV or a fridge or a washing machine for someone to not only deliver it to you, but also install it for you. There are companies which have said, if you place that order by 5 o'clock today, before 8 o'clock, we'll deliver it and install it for you, same day. Now, obviously, you need to not just have the logistics behind it to stock the product, but also have the manpower to be able to fulfill that. So that's just an example of how people are using the logistics part of it as a competitive advantage.
And it must drive geographic distribution as well. I mean, that's a very difficult promise to fulfill nationally. Maybe you can fulfill it within a city, but any larger than that.
Multiple cities.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So, what else in the supply chain arena? I mean, I've certainly worked in businesses where it just was not evident how product was going to get from import or from factory to distribution, and the whole structure or non-structure of that sector. You know, is there anything else that is happening in that arena that either helps or hinders those moving in, or just encourages innovation on site? Which of those things is happening? Because to be successful, that's a problem that has to get solved.
I mean, I think we're seeing a couple of things. One of them we heard earlier about Narendra Modi and some of the promises that he has made to the country. And one of them is the Make in India. So to really put some power behind the local manufacturer and make that a much more robust concept to be used to, fire that logistical power as well within the country. But, if we look at some of the limiting factors, the road networks are still very, very poor. So, the average delivery truck travels at about 12 miles an hour. There are 3.3 million kilometres of road networks in India. So there are some major undertakings that require some massive investment over the next few years if some of that is going to go right. But also if we look at some of the things that have happened in China, then maybe there is a comparison there as well. Some of the consumer goods or some of the retailers within China started to look at their own networks and realised that they weren't quite good enough as well to transport goods throughout a massive country. And they used the local franchise model. So actually, not only in every city, but in every town, even in every suburb of every town, they would empower local business people to act as delivery vehicles. They would build almost microcosms of manufacturing plants for very basic products. So it's not just about building massive manufacturing and massive logistical plants in major hubs. It's also thinking about what could be our hub and spoke model. What could we manufacture and distribute very quickly within a micro environment rather than a macro one? And how does that facilitate our logistics as well? So I think thinking more innovatively about, it's not just the model we've known in the West that we then transport, but what are the more flexible, agile models that we can also start up in very local environments.
And particularly true if your ambition is to build a national brand.
Yes.
I mean, if you want to cover the territory, that's actually something you have to address somehow.
Yes. And also you get a real investment from the people. So what we've seen in China is that those very, very micro environments become massive advocates then for what is ultimately a global brand. But they are able to personalise them in a way that perhaps they wouldn't have been able to do if you'd have just replicated the Western model. So there are some advantages to that as well.
Pritam, any particular experiences from your side?
So, not really, but I think what Rebecca made a very good specific points. One of the things which we have been always stressing is localization. Localization is very important in India. So, you have to go to each state and understand the dynamics. Not necessarily what is successful in Delhi would be successful in, say, the southern part of India. And if you are if you are not thinking about that, there is a way that you won't be able to get the desired returns. And specifically, in terms of the way you create the brand valuation, what we have seen is that there are a set of people in any Indian society, specifically in the rural areas, who are opinion makers. So what we do is we work with them very closely and associate our products through them, or kind of make our brand stronger through them. So we work very closely in the Indian rural community, and these opinion makers actually help you drive brand awareness, brand sales, brand promotion through very simple things like kind of doing connect and working with their community. So you need to tie up with this opinion maker network specifically to build a very strong brand in India.
Yeah, I mean, I think as for people like Hindustan Lever, who've been there for a heck of a long time, you guys have spent a huge amount of that time building out into the rural areas. It's the same for Tata, which is why when foreign truck makers come into India, they suddenly find that Tata are preferable because they've just got this extraordinary logistics and distribution system behind them. I think that it seems to us that the lesson for new entrants is you've got to make the best of what is there, because if you're going to depend on doing something different, it is probably not going to work because it takes longer to put something different into India than you might think. You could get what's there, find out who the good guys are, and do it with them. And if you want to change it, it takes a long while.
Yeah. And the global branding element of that, bringing brand in that has global presence, a significant brand consciousness is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I don't know how many global brands are there in India. I would have thought. I wouldn't even think Coca-Cola was a real powerful brand in India yet. It's just too big
and layered.
It's people like the idea of these foreign brands coming in. I mean, nobody had heard of Wendy's, but you sort of kind of know it's foreign. Therefore, let's give it a go. That in itself is a starting point. But your reputation in India, it's not going to be built on the reputation the brand's got overseas. It's going to be built on the reputation you make for it in India. And if you definitely want it to screw up, you'll try and use what works in America in India. It won't.
Absolutely.
And I wouldn't have thought there was a single thing on our menu in Delhi that is on the menu in the Midwest. Now, there's obvious simple reasons like that around beef, but apart from that, it is completely different. And if you try and go in with what's worked for you beautifully over here, you mess it up.
McDonald's is a great example of localization in India. Means they have literally changed the way they operate. They are still one of the best known brands in terms of fast food. But if you see their menu, what they have given in India, and different parts of India have different flavors, and what you get here, it's completely different. So that element of localization, and there are obviously some examples also of companies who are great brands all over the world, but are not really that highly regarded.
And McDonald's announced the day before yesterday that they were bringing a lot of the vegetarian options that were successful in India back to here in the States.
Yeah.
But this isn't necessarily anything new, because at the end of the day, it's all about who is your customer.
Yeah.
And what products and services do you need to offer in order to appeal to that consumer base. India is unique in that I think it has more vegetarians. There are more vegetarians in India than in the rest of the world put together. So clearly, for consumer goods and for food retailers, there is an immediate, burning platform in which you need to localise around, and you'd be ignorant, as a consumer goods or a food retailer to ignore that and think that you could just replicate what you've done in other countries. But also some of the electronics providers, L&G or Panasonic, I think to one of your points earlier, the traditional models do not work in India because they are pricing out the mass market. So creating products that are, around 3,000 rupees, in that kind of 20, 30 pound, 50 pound bracket that you talked about, are the only way that they can actually get the brand to be well known, because otherwise they're going to be appealing to such a small slice of society. But in order to price a product at that amount, they don't only have to source parts locally, they have to manufacture them locally, so it changes their whole model. So thinking about who is my consumer base, how am I going to appeal to the mass market, what kind of product or service do I need in order to achieve that, and then how does that cascade into my marketing, sales, service, manufacturing, product launch approach. It all comes from what does the consumer want.
And so then finally, maybe looking at international retailers specifically rather than brands in general, and what has characterised success or failure, what's been learnt about what it is good to be and how you go about it as a retailer specifically, a branded retailer moving into that market. I mean, maybe you're the obvious candidate to look at that one first.
I guess we've been in India for over 6 years as a joint venture, for almost 14 years now as a brand, and certainly we've got quite a bit of experience, so I can share some of the learnings on that. I think first and foremost, and I'll slightly link it back to the earlier question as well in terms of the brand. I think as awareness and with the internet and the explosion of internet, awareness of global brands, awareness of what's available in the rest of the world is rapidly increasing in the country. Second, I think Britain specifically, because of the British history and the relationship that Britain has had with India, there is a natural affinity that British brands have in India, and that's certainly for Marks and Spencer. That's something which has worked very well. We have established ourselves, we've well accepted, and the fact that we today have India is the second largest market for us outside of the UK in terms of number of stores is an illustration of that fact, and we've had great success, and that's the reason we have continued to invest. India is one of the most important strategic growth markets for Marks and Spencer as a business. And that success has been possible because of the fact that international retailers are seen as offering something extra to the customer. And that's definitely one of the key factors in the growth that you see of international retailers in the country. At the same time, I think what is important is to adapt, and I think localization, what you talked about, and I can give you a number of examples of what we have done, and equally other retailers who didn't do it and hence haven't moved on. So, sorry, yeah.
Please.
Yeah, can I ask, one of the slightly disappointing things about travelling in Europe and to some extent the States is that the street scene is very similar. A lot of the shops and town centres are populated with the same stores. One of the interesting things about going to India is that hasn't yet at least been the case. Is it inevitable, therefore, that the street scene in India is going to mirror that scene in Europe and elsewhere?
Yes. Well, if you go into a big mall in Delhi, in my experience, or Bombay or wherever you happen to be, you seem to kind of recognise most of the names. I would have thought the answer was that's the problem, particularly if you're going into doing the shopping malls and stuff like that. Yeah, be the same brands. And that's not to say that the Indian brands won't come over here, which I think they will. But by and large, there will be as people build global brands, they go global.
Any other takers on that?
I think one of the key things which we have analyzed of Indian consumer and difference between a Western consumer is a concept of VFM, which we call as value for money. So an Indian consumer would always is ready to spend 150 pounds on a mobile phone, but not 2 pounds on delivery. So things like this are very different from a traditional Western consumers, and you need to understand those details, how you price and what you price. You'd rather pay those, say, 5 pounds on a warranty than paying 4 pounds on delivery. So you price and you need to put the message in a way, thinking in his shoes that what he is ready to pay, rather than I want to charge and see. So these are some things which really make the difference, or whether you are making the cut or not.
Are we answering why are those most successful international retailers successful?
Yeah.
The answer is because they've got the right partner. That is probably, in my view, the most important thing.
Yeah.
Because however good you are, you won't work. It won't work. You've got the wrong partner.
Which bears on local understanding.
Well, it depends what you're after. I mean, if you're in the food business, do you go for somebody who's a property developer because you've got access to loads of sites, or do you go for somebody who loves food because they're going to make sure the menu's perfect? So within that, there's a lot of decisions, but your partner's going to be Indian and he's going to understand the market better than you, whatever you might think.
Yeah. Please.
Yeah, my question is for David. You took Pizza Express and Wendy's to India. Now, Indian food world over actually is quite popular. I mean, we kind of call here curry house really. Do you foresee in next 10 years or 20 years, someone like you bringing one of the Indian food as a big brand out of India to say UK, Europe and America?
I'm quite sure as some of the Indian, the chains in India get bigger and indeed get to serve better food than some of the smaller shops in that line, they'll come over here. Absolutely. I mean, there must be more Indian restaurants here than anywhere else in the world apart from India. So yes, I'm sure these brands will go both ways. And it's not only India, you will get the best Taiwanese restaurant chain in Taiwan will eventually want to come here for global branding reasons.
And I don't think that will be restricted just to the food sector either. I think there will be many more Indian brands that come over here and to the rest of Europe and the rest of the Western world. And that will be partly facilitated by the social media and the smartphone apps and that path into immediate globalization that we're going to see increasingly happen in the next few years.
And many feedback loops in that as well.
Yeah.
I mean, Royal Enfield comes to mind as a once British, now Indian brand back into the UK.
Yeah.
One final question.
Okay, I mean, does that mean that there's likely to be greater problems for some of the international brands? I mean, if you look at the success of Flipkart or Snapdeal, and one of the reasons is not only a good adaptation and adoption of technology, but also a better understanding of the customer. When to pay, who to pay, when to buy, what to buy, etc., are far ahead, if you like, than what Amazon had found in the first place. So I'm just wondering that with the growth of, on the one hand, technology, the availability of technology, and a better understanding of the customer base, that it's going to be increasingly difficult for international brands to compete with Indian counterparts emerging. And is that not a good thing?
I mean, I would say that we're in a really interesting time with the rise of digital. You know, it's almost levelling out the playing field. We've had huge monopolies from global brands, not only in India but in the rest of the world as well, who have held us captive to their product or their service. And we've seen in the last few years, partly because of the economic situation, partly because of the rise of digital, that some of them have no longer, they've not maintained that position in the lead anymore. We've seen that with some retailers, with some food retailers, with some financial services organisations, and that disruption is continuing. So organisations that, whether they are global, local or startups, that have a good idea, that know their customer, that can apply the right localization or customer-focused strategy to their brand have got a massive opportunity to not only capture their local market, but also their global one as well, whether they are based in India, whether they're based in China, whether they're based in the UK. So I think, you know, back to your point about the retail high street looking the same everywhere, it's probably inevitable that will, you know, there'll be an 80-20 over the next few years, but I think the brands that will be on there will be slightly different to the ones that we might see if we go down, you know, Oxford Street in London today. There are going to be more international players, maybe hidden behind some of the brands that we perceive to be from our own country, and we've heard a number of examples of that today, but there will be a lot of international players backing the brands that we see on the high street.
And at that point, I think we've probably reached coffee, haven't we?
Yes.
So thank you very much.